Today I want to tell you about a journey that I've been on for most of my life. Ever since I was a kid, I've heard tales of Bigfoot and wild men while spending time with my friends and family. As I grew older and read more about the paranormal, my interest in cryptids and other things strange only deepened. That's why I'm so excited to share with you what I've personally become involved with, the Untold Radio Network. The Untold Radio Network is a live streaming podcast network that airs a new show every day across all podcast platforms, YouTube, and more. They have 8 different shows on all sorts of exciting topics, such as Bigfoot, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, and much more. I even have my own show called Weird Encounters where I talk about all things strange. This is more than just a podcast network. It's a community that allows me to meet so many amazing people who share their stories and experiences with the strange. If you're interested in hearing more of these stories and learning more about the paranormal and cryptids, make sure you check out the Untold Radio Network for all kinds of exciting shows. It's free to subscribe, so what are you waiting for? Visit www.untoldradionetwork.com today.
911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey there, and thanks so much for joining me for the show. This is the first of a series of 5 episodes that I'm going to put out for you guys while we're over in the UK and preparing for our trip up to the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference later this month. Tonight's episode and the 4 that will follow is all about what's going on with the wood apes in Area X. Brian Brown, former NAWAC member, was gracious enough to allow me to have exclusive access to this audio that he recorded for his podcast back in 2011, 12, 13, and 14. You are going to hear a ton of exclusive interviews with people that have had experiences in Area X, and in some cases they're literally sitting around the fire ring while they're having activity around them in Area X. No matter where you are on the spectrum with the NAWAC's mission to collect a specimen of one of these wood apes out in Area X, you cannot deny the experiences that they're having and the amount of data that they've collected over these many missions that they've had inside of Area X. They're staying up to 4 months at a time in this area, and they're collecting tons of data, whether it be visual observations, note-taking, tons of audio that they've captured in and around Area X. There is no doubt in my mind that they have done some phenomenal work. So I'd like to personally thank every member of the NAWAC that you're going to hear here, and even some of the former members like Brian Brown, Daryl Collier, and some of the other folks that you're going to hear during these next 5 episodes. If you want to know more about Area X and the NAWAC, the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, I'm going to link to the woodape.org website right here in the show notes. All you have to do is click that. There's tons of information over there in the form of articles, audio recordings, any and everything you'd want to know about the NAWAC and Area X you can find right there on woodape.org. But enough of that. I know you guys are ready to get into it, so all that's left for you to do is sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Whenever I post to our Facebook page that we're going to be recording a new show, and I ask our listeners there to suggest topics for us to discuss, one subject comes up again and again. Pretty much every time someone says they want to hear more about what's happening in Area X. Well, my friends, this is the show for you. What follows is more than 2 hours of Area X goodness. Much of it was recorded on location in the mountainous backwoods of eastern Oklahoma. As in the previous 2 years, the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, formerly known as the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy, is performing a continuous 3-month field study in their research area referred to as X. In 2011, this was called Operation Endurance. In 2012, it was Operation Persistence. This year, it's Operation Relentless, and it's happening right now. Up first in this episode is a conversation I had with NAWAC Chairman Alton Higgins and Kathy Strain, a United States Forest Service field anthropologist, noted author of Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters, Bigfoot Native Culture, and most impressively, I think, the all-time record holder for most Bigfoot show appearances. This is the Bigfoot show that is from the very pulsing nerve center of Area X, the epicenter of Area X. And I have with me Alton Higgins and Kathy Strain, and I'm excited because I realized when I was going to be down here this week that I was going to have a biologist and an anthropologist, 2 ists, and I thought it would be fun just to talk about what we've experienced down here over the years and this year and just get you guys' perspective on it. So I'm going to start with you, Alton, and ask you, we're in our 3rd year of these sort of long-term summer operations. How would you say this one's been going so far?
It's hard to compare years. You want activity, and there has been activity this year. We had a lot of activity last year, so it's natural to compare years. From my perspective, I think that the main thing we need to keep in mind with regard to our activity here is that the apes are still in the vicinity, and they are still expressing interest in our presence. The fact that there is activity and that the apes are here is what I think is important and what drives me to continue with the effort.
So what types of activity are you thinking is indicative of them being in the area?
Well, vocalizations is one category, and there have been a few possible vocalizations noted. Certainly the most distinctive for me, other than a sighting, is the act of throwing rocks. And we've had a fair amount of that activity. Just earlier today, we were asking the team that was on site for most of the day while we were gone for another responsibility. But while we were gone, they said that there were several distinctive rock throws during the day. If you count the evening and night hours, there were at least 5 distinctive rock throws noted by that group. There's no other explanation for large rocks hitting roofs other than either a human throwing them, and that was not the case here, or an ape throwing them.
And I heard 2 of those this morning, both of them pretty clear, and one of them sounded like a very large rock being thrown. Kathy, you've only just arrived on this, and you're going to be here for quite a while, several weeks. What do you hope to experience while you're here?
I hope to have a sighting, of course, a visual, but what I hope to do is document behavior, whether it's with a sighting or not, that can be attributed to their behavior, because we don't know an enormous amount about them, but we think they're very much ape. So I expect to see ape behavior and things that I can correlate with other known apes, and maybe tell me a little bit more of what their level of intelligence may be, what the interest in this area may be, so that we can better plan for future events, because this is a long-term. So every time we learn something, we can only make ourselves better by using that information to our advantage.
One of the things that we found this year that we've not found in the past is we have found boulders, and on top of those boulders, we have found the remains of hickory nuts. This year, we found in 2 separate locations boulders with the remains of hickory nuts, but also on those boulders, in one case at least, on top of the hickory nuts was another smaller rock, and it appeared that those nuts had been broken with the smaller rock on top of the boulder. Can you talk about, from an anthropological standpoint, the difference between using a rock to break a nut versus some people might say that's evidence of tool use and might use that to extrapolate their relative intelligence, just seeing evidence of the use of a rock to do something like that?
Very intriguing, because that is technically tool use. Taking a rock and using it in a method to crack something open, very much like an otter would use a rock to crack open a hard shell, is tool use. That's the very definition. It's not tool making, which shows a higher level of intelligence that is only attributed to Homo sapiens. But it does tell me that they are capable of using something in their environment to their advantage. And up to this point, I don't believe that we have seen anything like that. So even chimps will take a twig and use it to help them get termites. And the other important thing that I saw that I've been mulling over all day was finding firewood that belonged to camp located a distance away, and it appears to have been used to strike another tree to create wood knocking. That, to me, is even more intriguing, because to me, what that means is they recognize something from our camp that was beneficial to them that they could not find in the natural environment. So they found a piece of firewood more attractive than they would a branch or other piece of material out in the landscape. And so that's very indicative of something smart, maybe not our level of smart, but still very intelligent.
The difference between a piece of firewood and a piece of just wood in the forest is that it's been dried. It's all hardwood for the most part. Our firewood is hardwood. Alton, you and I yesterday found one of those in the past, and this was even further east away from our location. Just tell me what you think about that, and tell me what you did after we found that, just to figure out where this could have come from.
Yeah, the year before last year, Operation Endurance, we had a number of teams that reported hearing very loud, clear wood knocks that seemed to originate within the area of the cabins, very close. And team after team reported this, and they indicated the same direction as we've discussed before. We stumbled across this piece of firewood that was located next to a tree and a rock that, when struck, created the same sounds that these teams had been reporting for so many weeks. We had that in our heads as far as the idea of firewood with squared off ends and a certain length. That's just kind of part of what we had in our awareness. And when we were on this hike, we were far to the east, hundreds of yards east of the farthest east cabin. And again, we found a piece of hardwood that was located next to a tree. It had every appearance of having been used. It was broken. A part of it was broken off, and it looked like maybe it was a result of being hit against a rock or a tree. And it formed a nice handle for a human-sized hand, but I don't think that it was shaped like that so that an ape could grab it easier. I think it just broke. And the other end of it, there was a circular indentation, a mark, that looked like it was the result of an impact with something hard, either a hard bark tree or a rock perhaps. Part of what that indicated to me was the idea that they may use wood knocking as a way of communicating among themselves, not just as an intimidation thing or whatever else we may have speculated with regard to why do they exhibit this behavior. The fact that we heard it, we found that piece of firewood in a place where we here at the camp would not have heard it, suggests to me that it was used for communication among themselves. After we got back to camp, behind my tent and your tent is a little path, and right behind my tent, our tents, just, I don't know, was it even 20 feet, something like that maybe, or less than that, 12 feet or so. Anyway, we saw right in the path a piece of firewood. This was pine. It had the bark on it, so it was distinctly pine. And that was a great mystery because we hadn't seen pine used as firewood around here, and we checked all of the places where there's firewood around here, and all of it is hardwood. This was squared off in the ends, firewood length wood. I have no idea what to suggest for where that came from, but it was not there when we arrived.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing for me, is that we had been through that area multiple times, and as you alluded to, we're like looking for firewood where it doesn't belong. And we're being very careful about where we put firewood so that we don't accidentally get ourselves excited about something. And this piece of firewood was clearly sitting in this trail, and we did not put it there, and it had not been there. Previous to that, we had heard some sort of thudding sound. This is something that we've heard here on occasion from time to time, different types of thuds, but some sort of impact sound to the ground, a deep sound you almost feel as much as you hear, and we had heard something from that direction, and that was in between the time that we had been in that area and found the woods. It's conceivable, you can speculate, that wood had been chucked or something along those lines.
We tested that idea, too, with that very piece of wood. You threw it up in the air, and when it landed, it recreated this sound that sounded just like what all the team had heard earlier in that same direction. We heard this thud of something we speculated at the time. It sounded like a rock hitting damp earth or something. But when you threw that up in the air and it landed, it created the same sound from the same direction. It makes perfect sense to me that it was that same piece of wood.
So the other piece of evidence that sort of brings us to think there may have been something walking back there is there was a piece of wood on the ground. And tell us what you saw in that wood.
Yeah, it was lying across the path. It was near the piece of firewood. It was a couple of inches or so in diameter. It was just a stick that had fallen from a tree, and it was partially rotted. It was not rotted to the point where if you messed with it, it just fell apart. It was still fairly firm, but if you stood on it, it compressed a little. There was an 8-inch section of it that was just absolutely smashed. It would have taken a great deal of weight, I believe, to have done that. Many of us stood on that piece of wood, stomped on that piece of wood with one foot. Like I say, we just compressed it, and even after we'd done that probably 20 times or so, the wood still hadn't broken. Fairly confident, based on those observations and what happened with Jeff, that maybe a creature, an ape, had walked up behind our camp during the night.
The interesting bit about timing around that is that when we arrived, it was raining very hard, so we didn't pitch our tents the first night. We actually slept in one of the cabins. The night this happened was the first night that you had been in the tents over near that little trail. With regard to the different texture of activity, I don't want to say there's been less activity because we still sense activity, we still hear things, but there seems to be a different texture to the way they're interacting. There may be environmental reasons for that. Kathy, from your standpoint, do you believe the types of activity that we're experiencing, the level of activity we're experiencing might be different this year versus last or the year before that?
This is only year 3 into a study. It's difficult to say what is less or more because it's going to ebb and flow based on that. But so far, we're halfway through, and we haven't seen the frenzied behavior that I called it from last year, where their curiosity drove them to do some very bold things, where they wanted to have that contact with us. And so far, nothing that we have seen has risen to that level of frenzied behavior. We have a late spring. We have lots of water available. We have done one thing new with this new system that we've put in. So any combination of that can lead to disruption. It could be that their birthing cycle is not known to us, and then maybe it runs every 2 years, and now there's infants involved that may not make them inclined to be any closer to us than what they've been doing. So there's all kinds of unknowns that we probably will never know. It's hard to hypothesize because we're not going to be able to know. But I think the team makeup has been pretty even from the years before. I think we're seeing the same people return. This year we have a little more females on one team.
Some of the teams have been bigger this year, so there were more people, but I don't know if that's necessarily it. The problem, we have a jigsaw puzzle and all of the pieces are the same color, and we're in a room with no light trying to put this together. And so all we have are the observations that we have, and then all the time in between the observations trying to figure out why we're observing what we're observing.
And I think that's important to note that Jane Goodall was in contact with the chimps for many years before she even tried to hypothesize what the behavior. All she was doing was reporting, this is what happened, this was the result, it's X to Y to Z. It didn't have any speculation, and we really have to be careful with that because what we observe now and what our thought process of why that happened in 5 years may be very different. I like to use that Neanderthal example where we have one set of bones. It ended up being an older man who was crippled for years because that was the one example we had. Our viewpoint of Neanderthal was tainted as being slow, stupid, hunched over, when that couldn't have been further from the truth. And so we want to be very careful. We know that they use their environment to their advantage. We know that there's plenty of resources here. We know there's plenty of water here, and we know that they want to be here for some reason. And we know that there's more than one. Other than that, there's probably not a lot of facts that we can add to that. They knock wood sometimes, they clack rocks sometimes, they throw rocks seemingly a lot of time. What does any of that mean? Does it mean they want us out, or they want us to come out and play, or it has nothing to do with us? They just like the sound of rock on metal, and they giggle and think that's funny. We don't know. This may go on when we're not even here. And so we have no way of knowing that information.
Alton, one of the things we've done as a group is try to categorize the things that we know, the observable facts that we know, versus the things that are in the realm of speculation, and then the things that we just don't have any idea about. So with regard to all of what we're talking about, how does that influence how you approach this, and how do you think it should influence how we as an organization approached our work here?
I think the main thing is to record what we observe, what we experience, not to try to impute any kind of motives or to humanize the creatures or do anything like that. Just be as objective as possible, record what we do, record what we observe, and try to do the best that we can to use our limited store of knowledge to try to improve our chances for obtaining more documentation.
I guess my viewpoint would be that we continue doing what we're doing. I know there's a lot of speculation we should go big and bold and do this crazy scheme over here or this crazy scheme over here, but really we know, at least through the first 2 years of study, that just being here, just being ourselves has caused some interaction. And so I think we are to stay the course of doing what we're doing because it may change behavior, it may desensitize them, it may overly sensitize them. And so we know that just being us, walking around, making observations at this point has been successful. So we need to continue doing that same method.
I think that I'm in the organization and I see it from the inside, but I think that in my mind, we have an internal dynamic that on one hand, we feel very strongly that a specimen needs to be collected so this animal can be shown to be real so that the work of conservation and study can really go forth in a huge way. But we're also trying to gather this data. So you have these conflicting drives in our work here. And it just seems to me that there's a certain level of frustration because on one hand, collecting a specimen is a finite objective. It can happen, that when it happens, it'll be obvious that it happens, whereas the collection of data just goes on. And then you have to analyze the data and everything else. The group sitting here now, our team is primarily looking for data, looking to collect information. But we've had other teams that are much more involved in the other side of the mission, which is the collection of a type specimen. One of the things that we've talked about amongst ourselves is this idea that what happens after the species is proven, whether it happens here or elsewhere, and how does that influence our organization's future? And as the chairman of the group, what are your thoughts? There's a lot of people that have this idea that we will be a critical player in that, we being everybody in the Bigfoot community. But what's your point of view on this idea of after the animal is proven, what is the role of groups like ours and others?
I think that subsequent to documentation, you're going to have federal agencies, you're going to have private organizations, you're going to have just a lot of focused energy that's going to be outside of our control. Certainly, the fact that we have years of observational data, I think will be of interest to them. I think the interpretation and use of that, we're collecting data for the scientific community. Whatever we collect, that's going to be made available to the scientific community. Whether or not we're involved as an organization is something that is outside of our control. So I frankly don't really worry about it much or dwell upon it. I think that our primary objective is to achieve documentation. And along the way, I don't see them as contradictory, to collect as much information as we can regarding hows and whens and whats in terms of our activities. People that have different perspectives, I think, when they look at all that kind of data, will come up with things that we might not have considered. Our job is not so much interpretive as collecting, and our role will be out of our hands. Hopefully, we'll have some kind of involvement in subsequent years in terms of trying to express to missions, the primatologist, whoever it is that ends up responsible for the follow-up research that will entail a huge amount of energy, resources, time. The questions that come from the documentation of the species will be endless. And probably the first one is, where does this species live? And that just by itself, the distribution and abundance question, that's going to be a primary focus. I think that once the documentation is achieved, the species will be declared an endangered species. I think it's the Secretary of the Interior that has the prerogative to do that, and that'll provide some time then for scientists to address this distribution and abundance question and habitat requirements and all that. It would make sense to me that they would look at the databases of some of the organizations besides ours that are out there, since we have a regional focus.
The interesting thing about the Endangered Species Declaration is it isn't necessarily because we know them to be endangered, just because that sort of freezes the table and nothing else can happen until that determination is made.
I think what we're doing is providing the baseline data, and that's, I got to emphasize data. We're not going to be providing baseline analysis or baseline, this is what we think these monkeys are doing out here. It's the baseline data. We are excellent at taking raw notes and turning them into just factual sheets that can easily be turned over to, if it's Fish and Wildlife Service or whoever would be leading the charge of that. And I think that will provide them important information, because at that time of discovery, you're going to have everything in the world coming out of the woodwork going, they're telepathic, they are here from aliens, and I think our documentation clearly proves that they're flesh and blood, that they're clearly not capable of reading our minds or making us telepathically do things. And so I think that will help them rule out some of that stuff that they can just go, no thank you, have a nice day, and just push it out of the way.
I'm pretty sure a psychic monkey made me drive my truck through a creek that was too high the other day.
I'm very sure. I kept thinking to myself, Brian, why did you do that? And I thought, he was told to do it. It was the monkeys doing it. Yeah, and I think that they would be declared an endangered species right off the bat, and it would allow at least, in my mind, a 20 to 25-year time period to do that research in order to protect their habitat. It would protect them from hunting. It would protect them from maybe some of their habitat being destroyed by unnecessary means. And it will be a rude shock to a lot of industries and a lot of other individuals, but I think in the end it'll all be for the benefit. It's pretty exciting to me that that is a potential out there, because many times when you're just by yourself, you don't see the benefit of you being out there for 10 days and sweating it out and really having nothing happen.
Ultimately, we're a conservation group. So ultimately, we're trying to make sure that their habitat is preserved so that they can be preserved. So everything we do should be focused on that. And that's what's most exciting to me, is that after the animal is established, then the work of conservation can take place. That will make what happened with the spotted owl look like a birthday party. But the other thing I notice as I'm sitting here with you guys is that, Alton, you've been coming in here longer than anyone in our organization. And Kathy, you were here with me when we had our sighting last year, which I've talked about on the show, but only from my perspective. And now you're here. So what I'd like to do is get to a sort of transition to a conversation about experiences. Alton, can you give us a quick version of how did we end up here? How did this place, or how did it show up on our radar?
I was in the BFRO at the time, and a fellow member and I came to this region. I was interested in some spots that I'd found on topo maps, and we, by pure luck, ran into a Forest Service supervisor who was retired, and he'd had these creatures on his property. In visiting with him, he started out to show us how to get to the place I was wanting to get to, but there's so many roads out there, Forest Service roads, that don't show up on any maps. It was really confusing. So I asked him, if it was up to you, where would you go? So he told us about this place and said, I think I can arrange for a guide to show you how to get in there. On that first trip, I was fortunate enough to find a really good trackway. It was in dried mud, 16-inch tracks. Paralleling the tracks was a set of bear tracks, large and then small. So that's what started. And then I started talking to people that owned property here and those that had long experience with this area. And we organized a couple of expeditions when I was with the BFRO, and we came in here, had some experiences that reconfirmed in my mind that this was a place where the species could be found. And so when I joined the TBRC, now the NAWAC, we were looking for areas to put camera traps. So we came in here with Operation Forest Vigil and had cameras in here for a number of years. We didn't get any photos, but we became convinced that the species was here. We were already convinced, that's why we were here, but we decided to take a different tack and employ a longer range on-site strategy. That's what we're doing now.
Why do we not disclose the location? From an organizational standpoint, why do we not just basically put a big red X on a map and tell everybody where it is? Why do we try to keep this place to ourselves for as long as we can?
You want to control as many variables as possible when you're doing anything from a scientific perspective, and one variable we do not want to have to mess with is that of other people. That's our primary concern. We want to know that the things that we're observing and documenting are the result of native species of animal, and that they're not the result of people coming in here. And this is an area that's very difficult to reach, and it's a beautiful, pristine area. And we're blessed to be able to come here and observe and document in an unspoiled.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
And I'm thinking specifically about the rocks that we found, the boulder and the nuts and the little crushing rock, if that's what it is. The only way that could be used in the way that it appears to have been used. There's, as I said before, there's a boulder, there's the remains of nuts, and on top of that, there is a rock. And so the nuts are under the rock and around the rock. So that you can sit there and look at that all day long, and you cannot come up with a way that without the intervention of some kind of animal, those things came to be organized that way. It can't be explained by anything that I can think of. So therefore, if it is as it appears that the rock was being used to crush the nuts, you need to have an animal that can hold a rock. So humans can hold rocks, and so presumably can wood apes. So we need to be able to know that there aren't people in here setting up these things for us to find. Now, it's interesting that we've been finding these boulders with nuts on them for many years. So this isn't the first time we've seen this. It is the first time we've seen it with the little pounding rock in place. What are just one or two of the, or three or eight of the sort of interesting experiences you've had in here over that time?
I think I've mentioned before about hearing rocks hitting buildings. Unless you experience that, you can't imagine the adrenaline rush that produces when you know positively that a rock hit a building or a rock was thrown at you from this steep mountainside that's right behind us, and that people are not involved. That's an incredible rush, but it's also great confirmation that you're in the right place and that an undiscovered, undocumented species in the neighborhood. Unless you see this place, you can't really appreciate how rugged it is, how dangerous it is, how difficult it is to get around, how thick the vegetation is, and how terrible the visibility is here. Animals can be extremely close to you, and then they just take a few steps and they seemingly disappear. We've seen this happen with deer, bear, and these creatures. It's hard for people that don't get out in this kind of habitat very much to really appreciate the extreme difficulty of the task that we face here. But so that's part and parcel of it too, is being able to just be in this place. Don't know how many people I've heard talk about how this is a magical place. Like I said, it can be hot and miserable. It's filled with ticks and greenbrier and horrible dangers, but at the same time, it's beautiful. And it's just a majestic place. When you're here, it's almost like you feel like you're back in time or something, other than around the cabin. It doesn't seem to be jets flying overhead. It's a very quiet place. You're just in the middle of an area that almost like being dropped into the Pleistocene or something.
I was mentioning yesterday that you spend a week in here and you get to the point where you're ready to go, right? And you load your stuff in your car or your truck and you get out. A day and a half after you get home, you're like, I wonder what's going on down there. And you want to go back there again.
Of course, we've talked about this in other broadcasts, but yeah, the rock thing that's one of their favorite behaviors, it seems. I don't know why they do it. We've noted coincidence in terms of rock throwing events and our comings and goings. It seems that there's something pertinent along those lines. I don't know if they do it for fun or what it is, because we've had these things that the guys call rock wars, where we're throwing up into this green abyss behind us, and I guess an abyss is a hole. Anyway, this green wall behind us, they're throwing rocks up there and rocks coming back out of it. I don't know if that's play or what that is, but we know that they do it. So that's a memorable thing. And I was up on the roof collecting the rocks for whatever reason. A wood ape threw this rock.
We'll get a keychain and we'll stamp our logo on it. So, Kathy, we're very close to the area that we had our sighting last year, but you were here too. If I had the worst view of what we saw, you had the best view. So could you relate the Reader's Digest version? Or just what did you see and what sticks with you today? And this is, I think, the first time you've been back since that time. Just what are your feelings about it now, just a little over a year later?
What I saw was very distinctly two individuals walking towards us, and I wasn't paying as much attention to the small one as I was the big one. It just seemed like they were oblivious that we were there. They were trying to find a place to go up the mountain to get to safety. Could hear their rustling of their feet at first, and then they broke out into the open completely, like I said, oblivious to us being there. I jumped up and said, there they are, and then I ran towards them. My actions caused them to bolt up the hillside to get away from us. Of course, in hindsight, I wish I had just let them see how close they were going to get to us before it dawned on them that we were sitting there. But my attention then focused almost immediately to the big one. Because it was larger, I felt like I could get more details from their body type, what they look like, how they were going to move, than I could the small one. Quick, that's what kind of took my breath away. They went up the hillside like they had been ripped up on a bungee cord. The big one took its arms and tucked into its sides, much like what I would envision a power runner going up a hill would do, and was pumping them, not on all fours, nothing like that, not swinging. It was very tight to their chest. I envisioned that they were doing that because breaking through vines and using their forearms to crush through it. Then it turned its feet to walk duck-like, but not webbing or anything like that, but just turned its feet to the side in order to get better grip going up the hill. And much to my surprise, I really expected that more classic tightrope type walking that's talked about often, but this was definitely not that. This was I'm going to get up that mountainside as fast as I can possibly get, and it was just like lightning going up the hillside. And then there was other action after that. There was actually quite a busy week, but being back here now, I feel still very blessed that I had that experience, but also very enthralled that maybe I can have something like that again, because initially, I think the whole setup of why that happened was that they were very curious, and I can't help but wonder if that wasn't something unusual that they heard, that there was like, what in the world is that horrible scratchy noise? Make it stop, God, make it stop. And they were trying to come in to smother me with a pillow or something. But hopefully we can use that kind of intrigue to bring them back in again to make an observation. But it also made me realize that they can easily lose track of us because they should have known where we were sitting, but they were oblivious to it. So they clearly had lost track of where we were. I just think that probably happens more often than not, where they think X and it's really Y going on, and that's why those encounters happen, because they're not intentional.
I can't think of any of the encounters we've had here where it seemed obvious that the animal wanted to be seen. There have been occasions the animals reacted in a way that made it seem like it didn't mind that it was seen, but those seem to be very specifically around certain individuals. Others have been very active to get away as quickly as possible. And the distraction thing is interesting to me, the fact that they didn't know we were there, even though we weren't that far away. We had been moving around quite a bit prior to that, and we had just come back to our sort of base camp. You had an observation specifically around how they were moving that may help explain why they were not as focused on us as they may have been. Can you speak to that? In the few seconds you had seen them, what did you observe them doing?
What it looked like what was happening is the big one was trying to break to go up the hillside forward, and so the big one would go, what? And then try to catch up with the little one and go, we're going this direction, much like a mother would try to coach their child, you need to come with me now, and the child wasn't willing to. And so that's how it appeared, was like, okay, let's go. No, okay, you're not coming. All right, come on, let's go. And it wasn't until I said, oh my God, there they are, that they both became in tune with each other, and they both went, boom. But even then, they didn't go the same path as each other. So the big one went up first without regard to the little one at all. And the little one, I don't think, followed exactly the same path, but I'm not sure of that because, like I said, I was totally focused on the big one. It really felt like mother and child. It did not have the appearance of a father who would have been a little more forceful in directing that child and where it wanted to go. And so it was more of a mother with a precocious little one who was curious but unaware that there was maybe danger just another 5 feet. Oh, the big one was huge. We put Mark McClurkin, who is about 6'3" and big boy, up on the hillside, and I stood in my perspective, and the big one dwarfed him. And the little one was roughly half that size. And when you say little one, you're thinking, well, foot tall, but it's really not, at least 3 to 4 foot tall. And I'm sure up against me, because I'm not that tall, it would have been just slightly smaller than us, but it was completely black. Face was black. There was no other color that was represented, and it was pure daylight. In fact, it was not all that much from where we're talking now, and you can see how well you can see out into the forest. I think for me, the reason why I think it was powerful was it wasn't what I expected. I really was expecting the slow-mo, patty. Right. I had all the time in the world to observe it and all of that, and it reinforced that oh, that's why people say, I didn't have time to react. And then for me, even though I'm a professional and I came here to see one, my reaction to it was very not what I expected of myself. I really lost my cool. I was really, okay, honey, it's time to go home now. And I've had enough. And I had a slight meltdown because I had to get that stress out of me that where I was going to have a panic attack or something, because it was not what I expected. Again, what I expected was Patty. I expected her to, I guess, stroll through camp, give me half an hour to photograph her in various positions.
It's the freaking out thing, at least for me, because I think we were all pretty affected by what we had seen. And I kept going on about this when I talked about it, but the speed of the thing was just mind-blowing. And it's interesting you say that I expected it to look like Patty, because we have another member who had a sighting early on this year. He didn't process what he was seeing at first, because he said he always thought he would see Patty. And it seems that image is almost to our detriment now, because we all expect it's going to be the Patterson-Gimlin subject. A lot of them that we see here, the 3 or 4 that we've seen perhaps, they don't fit into that.
But they do in a way. You can tell somebody all you want to that something's 8 foot tall and weighs 500 pounds, but until you see what that looks like, you don't have a perspective of what that's supposed to look like. And I've grown up in the forest. I've seen bear. I've seen everything. And when I see a bear, I know when I see a bear. If I see a coyote, I know when I see a coyote. And this didn't fit my image of what I was expecting.
So if you compare and contrast to the Patterson-Gimlin subject, which I believe anyone who listens to this show knows that I think that this is a genuine film of a genuine animal. We've got, as an organization, have photos we've collected from other parts of Oklahoma that seem to show an animal that looked like Patty. The gray one that we've seen here, the bits of it that we have seen look very much like Patty. That animal looks more like Patty than any others. So now what you have is just a collection of different body types. So if now Patty is genuine, her lack of alacrity in getting away from Patterson and Gimlin, all you're left with is this is the observation. We cannot say why Patty didn't bolt, didn't jump, and move as quickly as we've observed them moving here. The gray one doesn't either.
Yeah, it behaves indifferently when it has been observed, it seems.
And the question, so why, people ask, we don't know.
In the end, what we're going to hopefully be documenting is because we're documenting time of day, time of year, season, conditions, what we saw, what color was it, the height, whatever. At some point, we're going to be able then to put male, female, age, other thing going on. And it may be what we see in the end is genders act differently, situations act, who else is also present. Maybe the gray one acts differently because he knows or she knows that she's got 4 others in the sidelines. We're just recording the data, and at some point it will make sense and it will all come together because somebody will see the other half that we're not seeing.
The best and clearest view of the gray one we've had here was later in the season, and Patty was filmed in October, and it's interesting to me that those are late in season. A lot of animals put on a lot of weight over the summer when the food is plentiful. So that's just another possibility. They just get fat. They're going to be cold, and there's not going to be a lot of food. So again, you just need more observation.
If we could have somebody here 365 days a year, we would then be able to tell what goes on when we're not here, because we don't have any clue. For all they know, they sit at the table and play poker and rummage through all our stuff. But and that was an observation that I wanted to make before, was why the firewood is so important to me is because there are items that they can take at any time, including food, and that has not happened. Why firewood? When I have my choice of meat or free food, vegetables, fruit, all this stuff, none of that stuff has ever been disturbed, which is what you'd expect with bear behavior, of course. But instead, they're choosing to take firewood, which to us is a throwaway, nothing item. And so it adds a perspective of what they consider valuable, that they're not interested in metal items, they're not interested in tools that we already have produced or mirrors or any of that items.
We had an experience earlier in the operation that I'll just say there was activity near our woodshed, and what we heard was the sound of the metal corrugated roof being messed with. When we found that firewood, it changed our perspective on what may have been happening over there. It
probably indicated that the firewood was the objective, and the sound, I think, was secondary to that. I don't think they went over there to rub the sheet there was a loose sheet up there. You can rub it back and forth and make a really loud noise. I don't think they were there to make noise. I think that was incidental to their primary objective, which is snag themselves a good piece of firewood.
In my mind, all of this to me ties back. We have so many questions, and we have remarkably little actual data and practically no answers whatsoever. And the only way the data and the answers will come about is with concerted study, with 24/7, 365 study of these animals where they live. And that won't happen until they're proven to exist. So for me, all of this just ties back neatly into a little package for us.
One of my favorite things is seeing the reactions of other people when they come here. You can't guarantee that anything will ever happen or that any one person will have something happen, but over the years, it's been terrific to bring in people like you. We brought you in here, and you saw and experienced things that you probably never would have imagined. And I remember John Myansinski, we brought him in here, and he had some really neat observations and experiences. And Kathy, it's very different when you have one person who makes outlandish claims and they keep going and coming back and saying, I have this, I've seen this. When you're bringing in lots of people who you trust and who you have confidence in, yourself, Kathy, and Bob Strain, they were brought in here and they were able to confirm for themselves, at least. It certainly hasn't convinced the scientific community, but it's a great joy to see the people observing and experiencing the same things that we've been saying and seeing.
We're upwards of a dozen people who have had really compelling experiences down here. Sightings, like actual, I saw a big hairy monkey, and I know they're not monkeys. All right. Thanks, guys, for sitting down. I know, Alton, you're getting ready to bug out, and Kathy, you're just getting ready to settle in here. So I appreciate this little nexus of the time that you were both available.
We've known each other since 99, I think we figured out. Probably for 4 years, we were like BFRO friends, communicating with each other through the investigator and curator forums. And we met in 2003, and it's just been great to be able to see her again.
Thank you guys very much, and thanks for talking to me. Next up, it's Kathy again, along with Monica Rollins. They were talking to me one dark night as we sat around a campfire waiting for those pesky wood apes to make themselves known. You're going to hear us make mention of various things during this interview that were happening around us, but you won't be able to hear them yourself due to the type of microphone I was using. In fact, I had headphones on and I could only hear what was recording, so I didn't hear any of it as it happened either. You can only barely make out the nice fire we had going and all of its popping and crackling. So anyway, here's Kathy and Monica. Okay, so now it's a few days after my conversation with Kathy and Alton, and in the middle of actual Bigfooting at this point, aren't we? It's funny, we were talking about how the activity was low on the last conversation, and now we've actually had some interesting activity, so I thought it would be a good opportunity now to talk to Kathy Strain again and Monica Rollins. We're the only three here right now. We've had a larger crew, but two of them have left today, so it's just the three of us, and we're sitting around a campfire. Kathy, what's happened the past couple of days? How would you characterize the activity that's happened around us?
It's been very active. We've had lots of rock throws, lots of appearing to want to be close to us and observe what we're doing. We've had at least what I would call a primate display out of anger or the need to show that we have a dominant male in this area. So it's been very exciting and a little intimidating all at the same time, but I'm enjoying it because it's behavior that needs to be recorded. I'm excited to be here to see it firsthand.
Monica, it's been a while since you were in X. When's the last time you were here?
Oh, I think it was January of 2010.
What are your impressions of it thus far?
I am very impressed with the increased activity because the last time I was here, there really wasn't much going on. We would always, when we would come in, mostly in the summers, we would hear what we assumed were nuts hitting the roof of this place we're at now. Seeing that that's leading to more and more activity in this area is very interesting.
So you were here during, was it the camera trap operations? That's the last time you were here?
Yes.
Kathy, the other night, one of the first notable things that I'm remembering off the top of my head that happened is we're sitting around a campfire ring that's maybe 30 or 40 yards from where my truck is parked, and my truck is parked up against the woods, and you saw something over there. Can you describe what you saw behind my truck?
Yes, so we have a pretty large fire going almost every night. I was looking towards your truck, and the only light was the fire. I saw two orange eyes that were perfectly round, that was on the driver's side looking at me, and I could see it through the passenger window. And it looked at me, it looked away, then it looked back at, or not me in particular, I guess more like at the fire, and the firelight was catching its eye shine. Then I saw it lower, like it was going to move, and then we heard something big move off into the brush very suddenly.
Those aren't reflections because I'm looking at my truck then and now, and the fire's not reflecting in the window, so that's not what that was. What's interesting about that is we've had some of the other members who were here perceived what they thought was motion. Also, last night, I was going to, my tent is pitched over there, and I was going to go into my tent. And as I walked over towards my truck, I heard from behind the truck, in the woods right behind my truck, 3 loud, very discernible footsteps, sort of crunch, moving away from me as I was walking over there. So I put everything down, lit up the area. I told everyone what I had heard. And it took a while for them to come over, maybe, 20 seconds. And as I was moving around the woods over there, I could continue to hear something in there moving further away. But I also heard what I can only describe as like a gibbering, whispering, a sort of a kind of weird-ass sound that I've never heard before in my life. Monica, you also heard some interesting sounds last night, not too long after that. What were those like?
As I was collecting my things from my tent, I turned around to walk back to the cabin, and I could have sworn I heard from a very low, garbled whisper, similar to what you heard. And it sounds weird. It's not something you expect to hear while you're trying to get into a cabin from a tent.
There's all kinds of sounds that happen out here. You get used to the ones that are quote unquote normal, and then when something new comes along. One of the things that we had experimented with, the NAWAC recorded some vocalizations a couple of years ago during Operation Endurance that sounded, to those of us who've listened to it, not unlike the Sierra sounds. One of the things that we had talked about doing last night was actually call blasting part of the Sierra sounds. It's the Sierra Sound Vocalization 1 is the one we were using. It's the one that the people on the Sierra sounds, I think, is a female. We picked it because we thought it was the least aggressive, but in listening to it, maybe we were wrong about that, especially in light of what happened. We had sent that out. We had decided to go to bed. The first time we decided to go to bed was when the thing walked behind the truck, that sound. That got us riled up for about another hour or so. Then we're like, okay, this time we're really going to go to bed. Even though part of it happened to me, you're tired of listening to my voice, I'm going to have Kathy describe what happened next.
Essentially, we had decided we were going to attempt for our second time to go to bed. The girls had gone inside to the cabin to get ready. Brian had a radio, and he was going to do a radio check. So I was busy bothering around, and he had called a couple of times. And I had not responded. And then he yelled out, radio check, and I heard him. So I called back on the radio to do the radio check and verified that both our radios were working.
And actually, I yelled that really loud because I heard it actually echo in the valley when I did it.
And next thing I know, I'm getting ready to go to bed, and Brian had moved our chairs over to a side area to protect it from any rain that we were expecting to come the following morning. Brian realized that he had left his gun attached to his chair, and he was walking over to the east side of the cabin. All of a sudden, all I can describe is at first what I heard was all these rocks starting to dislodge, and then I heard the very distinct cracking of a tree coming down like it was being pushed over. And I heard Brian yell out, tree! And we all heard the crashing noise, and it took me just a little bit to recognize cracking represented a tree. So I ran outside barefoot. I didn't even have my gun or anything, and we just all ran out, and we could still hear the thing kind of clambering down. It was still in the process of trying to come to rest someplace. It was very clear to me what had happened is Brian had... Now, whether it would have pushed a tree down, whether or not, but Brian's action of going to the side of the cabin while the rest of us were inside safe, I think was very intimidating to what was on the hillside already watching us. And so its reaction was one you would expect an ape, a chimp, or a gorilla to do to try to intimidate the dominant male that was encroaching on its territory. And so had Brian not gone and gotten his gun, would it have happened? We don't know. Was there an imaginary line that those wood apes have that they don't want anybody crossing? Probably yes. Had a female done it, would they have reacted the same? Probably not. That's ape behavior. And it doesn't mean that, even though we recognize that it was a display, that it was any less intimidating, for sure. It was just like, because then all of us slept in the cabin. Nobody slept in a tent.
Tents were off limits at that point. So we had done the Sierra sounds, and then I had been making calls myself. I was trying to imitate the barred owl. I wasn't trying to make Bigfoot howls or anything, but I was making loud noises and screaming and yelling. And so the situation that we had had here for the past couple of days, it was myself and 4 women. So if you're looking down there and you're a primate and you have a collection of people around you, of monkeys or apes around you, I don't know. Did they think that I was the dominant male? Did they think that they need to make some sort of display? I did feel that when I walked over there, I took a beeline right towards where my chair was, where the holster was slung over the chair. Directly above that is where the tree was pushed down. Now, I lit it up with my flashlight. I didn't see any motion up there, but it sounded huge, and you could hear it just like crack, snap, 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 and then crash really loud. So yeah, I felt that it was aimed at me. Monica, you were in your tent when you heard that. What was going through your mind when you heard the tree come down?
I knew immediately from the sound what it was, because I've heard trees fall before, and it was that crack and crack, 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 crash. And I just sat there thinking, I hope it doesn't hit the cabin. And then I thought, all that activity is going on the other side of the cabin. I'm sitting over here by myself. I was fully expecting something to happen behind me, the area behind me, which is heavily wooded. And we have had activity going on back there. And then you started yelling, everybody came out, and I was concerned because I didn't know where the tree had landed.
The reason why I'm fairly confident saying that it's ape-related is as we looked up there, Kathy saw, I think it was just the two of us, saw some flashes of orange eye shine. What are you pointing at? A rock just what?
Hit over by the tent.
Excellent. They better not hit my truck or I'm going to be pissed off. So we were looking up there. We saw some eye shine. Then we came back around the fire. Monica, about half an hour later, something happened. What happened after that?
Oh, the rock. Oh, my gosh. That was very interesting. It was definitely not a nut falling out of the tree, which is always something that we have to try to discern. Was it a rock? Was it a nut? It's hard to tell a lot of the time. But this, I could hear it actually, the leaves starting far away, getting closer, and then thud. It landed about 15 feet from the fire, which was incredibly close because so far nothing that's been tossed at us or fallen from trees has been quite that close. So that was very interesting. And I was able to walk over and look right at what had been thrown.
You saw the rock on the ground that had just landed there from up on the hillside.
Yeah, that was very interesting. I hadn't ever experienced anything quite like that before. It was very close. And I could hear the trajectory of the rock coming through the leaves. Far away, closer, thud. There it is.
That's when it's really compelling, is when you can hear it moving through the sort of the foliage of the trees, because then you get a sense of the direction it's coming from. And it did come from the direction almost exactly where we perceived eye shine, and in the direction of where the tree had fallen down. The other thing that happened directly just after the tree was pushed down is there's another cabin to our south, and we heard unmistakable sounds of rocks hitting the tin roof of that cabin. So that happened immediately afterwards. You saw a little eye shine up there? A little bit. Okay, cool. That's essentially the sort of headline of the activity. I think that it was fun. Yeah, today when the sun was up, it was fun. So the other thing that happened, I'll mention before we sign off here and pay more attention to what's happening on the hillside above us. The other day I was driving out. We had some people who were leaving, and I was driving them out of the canyon because they didn't have a vehicle that could make the trip. Unmistakable sounds of rocks hitting the roof of one of those cabins over there. And as Monica said, the nuts are falling. This time of year especially, the nuts are green, and the ones that are being chewed on by insects have started to fall. So you have to be careful. But the nut sound is a sort of a lighter, plinkier sound. When the rocks hit, it's a much deeper and more sort of noticeable rock sound. In any event, we had heard that twice in about 5 minutes from the direction that we were about to be driving. So as we were driving out, I was keeping my eyes open. We were all keeping our eyes open, looking in that general direction. And as we came around a clump of trees and one of the cabins became visible, I saw on the left side of the cabin motion. It was tall. It was taller than the fence. It was brown. It was taller than it was wide. All I can say is that I couldn't make out a head or arms or anything like that, but it was a definite brown. It was in motion when I saw it. It was over as soon as I saw it. It was a second long. I believe what happened is that whatever it was moved behind the cabin and took off into the undergrowth behind the cabin. So I don't know what to call that. I don't know. I'm not going to say that's an actual sighting. I don't know what it was. It was brown, tall, and moving. So I'll leave it at that. So that's what we got here from Area X, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll just keep paying attention to what's happening on the hill behind us. Finally, I have an interview with the inimitable Daryl Collier, field coordinator of the NAWAC. Daryl receives and compiles each team's field notes and analyzes the results. He's the guy to talk to if you want the big picture of what's happening in X. I reached Dale at his home in Waco, Texas. So you've heard the interviews that I did with Alton, Kathy, and Monica. It's interesting because over the course of just the few days that I recorded those, it seemed as though the activity level had been increasing. What's happened since the time that I spoke to Kathy and Monica, the interview that everyone just heard? What's happened in the couple of weeks since then?
We've had what appears to be a substantial increase in rock throwing. The team that just came out of there, we refer to them as golf team, We've already put together what we call the after action report. That's a report that we put together, and it's based on the field journals of the team. So we've already put that together. We've already begun to do an analysis of the activity that took place there. Golf team, which was there for 1 week, had more rock throws during their week than any team prior, and that includes all of Operation Relentless, Operation Persistence, and Operation Endurance.
So basically, like almost 3 years now of these field studies, and they experienced just an incredible number of rocks.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
Incredible, ridiculous. As I was putting together the after-action report, I thought surely it's going to let up sooner or later, but it was perfect for the name of this drill study, which is Operation Relentless, because the rock throwing was relentless. Now, somebody might question and wonder if we're falling victim to some nuts falling from trees.
Because there are nuts falling from trees, and they're not ripe yet, but some of the raw nuts are falling.
And the thing is that place is covered with hickory trees, and black walnut trees. It's covered with them. Obviously, logically, out of all the rock throws that we documented, we're not able to see all those rocks. In fact, we're not even able to see the vast majority of them. And you would have to assume that perhaps a small percentage of those are probably nuts. But here's the interesting thing. If there are nuts falling, I don't say that all the rocks that they documented are rocks, but I think the vast majority of them were truly rocks. But if you suppose 50% of them are not, we've got a strange phenomenon going on because there were very few impact sounds that they recorded as rocks during the daytime.
Right.
So what we've got is during the daytime, the team hears a significant number of what we call wood knocking during the daytime. And then once the sun goes down, the wood knocking subsides, and it's replaced with a more aggressive sort of sound, which is stone on metal, whether it's the cabin they're staying in or whether it's the other cabins in their immediate area. But the wood knocking all but disappears after dark, and it's replaced by banging on metal or rock impact noises on metal. You might be able to argue somewhat that they're mistaking some nuts falling the rocks, but I don't see how, because one thing they tested the differences.
You would expect the nuts to fall all day long. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
That's your point, right? If you want to take the most skeptical point of view, then you'd have to come up with an explanation as to why nuts only fall during the night and they don't fall during the day, because we don't hear them during the day. When I was in there, the nuts would fall, and the thing is, you learn to tell the difference, because the sound of a little nut, a little woody piece of vegetable matter hitting a tin roof is one thing. And whenever I heard that, even though those things could have been also thrown by whoever or whatever was throwing the rocks, you can't know for a fact where it came from, so you'd have to discount that. But when a rock hits a metal roof, that's a very different sound.
And our team tested that. First of all, they do roof sweeps almost every day or every other day, and they found on the roofs of the structures a significant number of rocks. Some were the size of large coins, and some, interestingly, were the size of beans.
Small.
So they tested the difference between the small bean-sized rocks, the hickory nuts and the black walnuts, and they found the same, but there's a pretty good difference in that the rocks don't roll, the nuts roll. They sound the same when they hit these nuts and these very small rocks, but it's the after effects of the nuts or the rocks that allows you to tell the difference. But here's the thing, I'm reading straight from our after-action report here. This is in the early morning hours of Wednesday, the 12th of June. Our team has been subjected to rock throwing ever since the sun went down. They went to bed at 3 a.m. 3:09, they documented another rock hitting the roof of the cabin. 3:21, another rock strikes the base camp cabin metal roof. 3:43, yet another rock hits the base camp cabin roof. Rocks, plural, continued to strike the roof of the base camp cabin. Hayes wondered if the apes ever rested as another rock hit the base camp cabin roof. With the sun just minutes from rising, another rock pops the cabin roof. Now, guess what? They stop right there. The sun is coming up. The rocks stop. I'm just scanning here. It's not until I'm trying to look for the next rock throw.
It's not until much later then.
11 o'clock the next night.
Right.
So there you go. No nuts from the time the sun went up till a couple of hours after the sun went down. And then, if you want to think for nuts, go ahead. But the nuts start falling again at 11 o'clock the next night. They continue until 0600 the next morning. The rock growth ceased at 0600 just as the sun is coming up. Now hear another one at 10:26, and I don't hear any more rocks until the next night after 9 p.m.
There's definitely a correlation between this activity that we're observing and whether or not there's daylight, which doesn't make sense if you're trying to subscribe to the nut theory. So what's interesting, what's different this year? I had talked earlier with Alton and Kathy. Things seem to be slower at the beginning of the operation, where in years past we had activity in the second week where we had some pretty intense things happen. I know I was there last year in the second week and had some interesting things happen, but that isn't really what we've seen this year.
We have a sense environmentally that things have changed. I think everybody that's participated so far this year, we're in our 8th team right now, a hotel team that's out there. So everybody that's participated in the first 4 to 5 weeks agreed pretty much to a person. Environmental conditions seem to be late.
Right.
It seemed to be a late spring. It's definitely a wetter spring than it had ever been. It's just we've been going in there. I don't remember. I've been going in there for a decade.
Just unbelievable amounts of rain. And day
rain.
after day of it.
Inundated.
Right.
It was pretty cool late into the year this year. I was part of the first team this year, and we only started a week earlier than we did last year. I was with the first team. It was downright chilly the first week. And I think it was probably that way the second week as well. You were there for the second team.
Yeah, it was much colder. Comparing the two Bravos, Bravo Persistence and Bravo Relentless, there was a week shift, but the foliage was maybe 70% what it had been a year before. I was needing to wear a jacket much more often. It was much cooler. And as we had said, much wetter. Though that week wasn't as bad as my second week in there. That was a really wet week. I bet we had 10 inches of rain that week. Unbelievable amounts of water. The week that I was in there for Bravo this year, I came out thinking a few things had happened, but it wasn't as eventful. It really, in the past couple of weeks, seems to have picked up quite a bit.
I think Echo Team was really the turning point.
Like the hinge, right.
Yeah, I would not classify the first 4 weeks as dead at all. The reason I say that is because we're coming out of Operation Persistence, which was just incredible. I think we're a little bit desensitized. We're a little bit numb to what's going on out there. I think if you brought somebody in that was totally fresh and had never experienced any of this before, I think they'd be blown away no matter which team we went in with. But comparatively speaking to, say, Bravo, Alpha, and Kilo, I think had the most activity last year. Compared to those 3 teams, we're just now, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, started seeing that sort of high level of activity. And I can't account for it other than maybe environmental conditions. But there's also another factor. Kathy Straining, she's in her 3rd week now. Mm-hmm. And coincidentally, things started to pick up really a little bit before Kathy got there. But when Kathy got there, it is what it is, right? Kathy was on Foxtrot team. She's on Echo. And we haven't heard from Hotel. So we don't know what's been going on out there for the last several days. She's been out there with Hotel team. Foxtrot and Golf were the 2 most active teams. I think probably Alpha would have been 3rd.
We haven't crunched all the numbers yet. I was on the Foxtrot team, and it was almost as active as we had experienced last year in the second week. Just a different texture of things. But besides the rocks, what kinds we've had a member with a clear daylight sighting. We've had just one of those this year, right?
Yeah, we've had one very clear sighting.
Right.
We've had a few others that were likely sightings.
Right.
And in the first week, I actually had a very possible sighting. I don't know what else that could have been, but I did not get a clear enough visual. And the way these things, the color of these 2 animals that I saw, just the way things happened. We had just heard a large rock hit one of the cabins, and so I went over there to investigate, and I saw 2 large charcoal animals through gaps in the vegetation running along. One appeared upright. The one behind it appeared more horizontal. They were fast. They were large. One cut across the creek, or they cut across the creek. I could hear them splashing in the water. Yeah, I could hear their feet splashing in the water. That happened. And so then I went to the east because I lost them. I attempted to pursue them, but I was not successful. I got away. So then I went back in the direction where I thought these things had come, thinking they might double back because we had some experience where it seems to have happened in the past. So I went east probably 150 yards. Meantime, Paul Bowman and Bob Strain are looking in the area where I had just come from. And Paul Bowman saw a brownish upright figure from about 80 yards away walking to the west. His first instinctive that he was seeing me, but he watched it for 5 or 6 seconds, and it had classic arm swing. It had a pointed head, and he's dark. The whole animal is dark brownish.
Right.
He described the face like a mottled color.
And it was a uniform color. The chest was darker, but the head and the shoulders was all sort of one sort of brownish color that clearly was not. That didn't match the description of anyone who was there.
But he thought at first it was me, but then when I came from the east, he knew right then and there that
right.
what he had seen was not me. And he had some difficulty dealing when he had not had a visual encounter before that. And as with most people, when they first see one, it shocks them. No matter how much they convince themselves in the past that these things exist, once you have that visual, reality really settles in, and you have to deal with it for a little bit, I think, and Paul was like that.
What's interesting to me about his experience is that it illustrates 2 points, and that if you're interested in collecting the specimen that the NAWAC feels needs to be collected to establish this animal as real so that we can actually begin the work of conservation, if you're interested in doing that and you have not yet seen one before, it's a very tricky thing because when you see one like he did, it looks like a person. Your brain tells you it's a person. So you therefore don't want to shoot at it, right?
Right. Especially at distance. He believed it was probably 75 yards away. And plus, he knew I was in that area. He thought I might be downrange. Yeah, you want to make sure. You definitely want to make sure. And although what he saw did not appear to be me, it's still the first thought in his mind is, am I seeing Daryl? It doesn't look like Daryl, but Daryl was down there. He said he was really expecting, in his mind, I guess he had this scenario already laid out in his mind that it would be this classic Patterson-Gimlin animal, Patty, walking and very clear to see and all that. And he didn't have that. It was not that thick. It was thinner than that.
Because Kathy said the same thing in the interview I had with her. So many of us have seen that figure so many times. That's what your brain is expecting. And what we found is that for the most part, at least the animals that we're seeing, there's only one that seems to clearly fit that description. The rest of them have a different body shape altogether.
Yeah, definitely the one that we refer to as old gray or the large gray one. That thing looks just like Patty's sister or brother. I'm telling you, McClurkin saw it for several seconds at a distance of about 20 yards at night.
Right.
I don't know if the listeners have heard about this encounter, but this is last August, September or August. McClurkin went in there. He and Alex Higgins arrived at about midnight. They had just been there for a few short minutes. I think he'd only been there 5 or 10 minutes.
They were still unloading the truck.
Alex had taken a load into the cabin. Martin was standing outside by his truck. He heard some rocks kick behind him, and there was this big gray one about 20 yards away, just standing there, just looking at him. And he stood there and just looked at it, and it stood there. After about 5, 6 seconds, he just turned around and walked off into the darkness. Not in a hurry. It didn't seem like it was threatened. It did not threaten him. Was not at all scared or intimidated of him. It was very confident. His description was more detailed than mine, and I had already said that I thought it looked very much like Patty. He got a much better look at it than I did. He said, absolutely. It's a spitting image of Patty, but it's gray from top to bottom.
And he said that was thick all the way down, just the way she was.
Every bit of 8 feet tall.
And what's interesting to me about that, and we touched on this in the conversation I had with Alton, is that some of the animals are very reluctant to be seen and seem to be expending an awful lot of energy to move quickly so that they aren't. But ones like this one, almost purposefully not expending a lot of energy. It's like, yeah, I know you saw me, so what? And they just walk off, but they're not running off. This one has, I don't know that we've ever seen this one moving very quickly. It seems to have this attitude of, I'm not going to make a big show of leaving right now. I'm just going to basically do it on my own sweet time. It's interesting to see the different personalities almost of the way these animals act around us.
Some of it's had the theory that this one we refer to as old gray may be patriarch or matriarch, and it doesn't bow to anything. It doesn't have to. When I saw old gray, it was definitely not moving quickly. It just stepped up on the big rock and stepped up on the bank very casually and was gone.
What's interesting, and I'm clearly not a primatologist. I went to the zoo the other day, so I'm like, I didn't even stay at the Holiday Inn, so I'm not that big of an expert. But we were at the Como Zoo here in Minneapolis, or over in St. Paul, actually. They have a new primate. They've redone their primate exhibit, and they have an exhibit with some orangutans in it. And what I found interesting is there's 4 orangutans in there, 3 of them came outside. 2 of them were playing. 1 of them was just hanging out. And then the big one came out, and it was a female. And she moved very slowly, very purposefully. The other ones got out of her way. She didn't look threatening, but she was really big. What struck me at the time was that she's acting the way that I think about Old Gray, about the way that one doesn't move in a big rush. It seems like it just waits for the world to get around it. And we don't know, but based on our observations, I think it is a safe assumption. That one seems to be pretty near the top of the pecking order.
Yeah, absolutely. This year, there seems to be a little bit of a different dynamic, and that is they're being very stingy their appearances this year.
Yes.
We've had one clear one. We've had a few others that were possible or even probable. Your encounter, I think, was more than likely one of these apes. You had heard banging on one of the cabins. You got in your truck, you drive out, and you scanned the area, and then you saw an X-light brown figure twice as tall as the fence step away or move away very quickly after the cabin had just been rocked, because there were a couple of rocks that had just been thrown at that cabin. Yeah, so you see an upright brown animal near at the cabin, and it steps away as you pull up. You didn't get a good look at it, but again, circumstantially, I don't know what else could have been there.
Right.
One of the people saw a small brown tailless animal jump from the top of one tree to another tree. Now, my own theory is that may have been a young one. There's no tail. The animal was uniformly brown. And the thing is, in 2004, I thought I saw something similar, but I don't think I got as good a view as what this person got. This person clearly saw the animal. And
we actually have one of the sort of quote-unquote historical sightings, one of the older sightings from the area from one of the family members who's been going in there, was of an ape-like animal up in a tree.
Yes, and one of our investigators last year caught one up in a tree.
Correct.
The arm wrapped around, the legs, the knee sticking out. It was up the tree about 20 feet. I know that it's incredible for people to believe. All I can tell you is we're just telling you everything that's happening there, and hopefully we'll be able to get that definitive evidence. One of our investigators caught one up in the tree. He saw it throw a rock at him from up in the tree.
Saw the arm swing.
And that we have reason to believe that they do take to the trees, either to look, to watch us, or to go up there and throw rocks at us.
But since then, and what's interesting to me about that is that week, there was another person in there who wasn't a member of the group, but who had a lot of experience around monkeys, specifically monkeys, and had actually raised monkeys. When our guy said, how are they getting the rocks up there? He immediately said, oh, they're putting them in their mouth. For him, it was clear that they would put stuff in their mouth as a way to hold on to it as they were doing that sort of thing. So who knows if that's what really happens?
But then remember, we had what we called the rain of rocks after that.
Yep.
What was it right before that? It was right in the same time frame. And we wondered, how in the world could they throw so many rocks, one right after the other? It was just a constant barrage of rocks. It's incredible to listen to it on the recording, but I want the listeners to know that it's incredible to be there.
You were there. Right.
I was there for 3 mornings in a row it happened. People say, why don't you go after them? We tried them. You go outside, and then you go around to the back, and you hear all these big animals moving off in the woods, and you can't go after them. It's frustrating. So then the next morning, you just lie there in the bed, because when you get up out of the bed, you run outside. I don't care. Trust me, I busted out that door more times than I can count. You run outside, and you can hear stuff moving off, and then you'll hear, as if the top, you'll hear one of them bust a cabin that's 60, 70 yards away that you can't get to. It's very frustrating.
It's difficult for people to understand how thick these woods are, and they come right up to the structure that we stay in. Yeah, it is an excuse. It's also true, right? So if you're an agile forest animal and you know how to move, we can't sneak out of that cabin because it makes all kinds of sounds. It's creaking, it's old, it's wooden. There's no way for us to like tiptoe out of that thing without them knowing if they're paying attention. And I think that's what we've experienced. And I've been in a situation where activity is occurring, you want to keep experiencing it. So there's a part of you that says, if I try to get up and run out there, there's a 0.5% chance that I'm going to see something. But if I lay here, stuff will keep happening. So you choose to lay there.
Yeah, the only way that we ever actually see them is when they make a mistake. When we're able to capitalize on their inability to track multiple people at the same time, or when they don't know we're there, which is not very often, and they walk out in front of us. That's the only way. Doing all kinds of stuff around the cabin, you try to chase after them, and they run off. It's like a game. I don't know. It's crazy, but we're lucky if we see them.
Correct. And if that's what it is, a big piece of this is luck. I remember, it's interesting you say that about if they make a mistake, because I remember talking to Rick Knoll several years ago. In fact, one of the first podcasts I did was with Rick Knoll. And he said to me, either on that podcast or at that time, that people see them when the apes make mistakes. That's when you see them. And when I was talking to Alton earlier in this episode, I know unless the gray one is okay with being seen, I don't know that they've ever purposely shown themselves. I can't think of a time where that would have happened. So I agree with you. I think that when you see one, it's because they've somehow miscalculated.
Unless the incident involving Mark McClellan.
That's the one I was thinking too, right?
I wondered about that. I was thinking about that a couple of weeks ago. I wonder if it was trying to intimidate him just by its sheer presence. Maybe this one is so confident, it's so bold that it stepped out there and said, here I am.
And of course, all we have is what we observe. When we spend so much time, we try to connect these dots. But really, the purpose of us being out there right now, besides trying to collect a specimen if we can, is to just make these observations. Kathy made the point earlier in the episode, too, about how you just have to observe these things, write things down, and in time, you can start to draw connections. And that's what we try to do because we're humans and we try to do that. But it's very difficult, even at this stage, even after being in there for 3 years and having all the experiences we've had, it's difficult to really know what the motivations are of these animals and what's making them do the things they do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, you say all we have are observations. We do have some physical evidence. We have collected physical evidence while we've been in there, these observations. I've seen more tracks in there now than I can count.
Yeah.
I've seen more than I can think of 3 or 4 or 5 instances where I've seen the tracks, and there have been more than that. The very first thing that brought us into this area were tracks that Alton Higgins found.
On his first trip.
Yeah, and that was over a decade ago. These apes, for whatever reason, and yes, I refer to them as apes because that's what I definitely believe they're apes, just based on our experience and the behavioral displays that they exhibit. These apes have been there for at least a decade, at least. For whatever reason, no residents there. They're bound and determined to stay, and our presence there over the last 2 years, the things we've done have not displaced them. They're still there. As golf team indicates, by the way, I don't think I've said, but we documented over 160 block throws during golf team.
It's amazing.
And that's just, the next closest team was the team from last year that had over 60 rock throws. Just incredible. They didn't have any visuals.
And we have some of the rocks. To your point earlier, we sweep the roofs, and Rick Hayes, I remember he posted a picture for us to look at of many of the rocks that he had pulled off this roof.
Yeah, and what's interesting also about the rock throws for golf team is that there seems to have been more incidences of our people being targeted.
Yeah.
Or Kathy Stray personally had at least a couple of rocks whiz by her body in her head. I'm talking within inches, just whizzed by her. Jerry Heston, he had to retreat because he felt that
he was a target.
So he actually went around. He tried to get away so they would stop throwing rocks at him. Because every time he moved, another rock would be thrown. It would bash the wall right beside him, missing by 2 feet. You have to think about that for a second.
And that is a bit of an escalation. I haven't ever felt like I was specifically a target. And I don't know that a lot of us have felt that way, but this is a change.
It happened to Paul.
Paul had that experience in the creek that landed very close to him.
Yeah, and when Travis and I were out one time, one threw a rock and missed him by a couple of feet. It was a big rock. It was few and far between, but these were all the same night. Jerry Heston had a rock thrown, and he's confident it was going at him. It hit the shed, scared him because it just came out of nowhere.
Right.
And then he walked over behind the cabin, and then here comes a rock out of the woods in front of him again. It bashes the wall right beside him. And then he decides to just bail out. I mean, he moves back behind on the other side of the cabin. But then Kathy becomes the target, and she had 2 rocks whipped by her. Now, these things are hidden. We can't see them throw the rocks, so take that into account. They remain hidden. They're throwing rocks, and they're almost hitting our people. I play baseball all my life. I don't know that I can do that at night in the dark from 25 to 30 to 40 yards away, concealed, and stay concealed
uphill through the trees
vegetation without the people I'm throwing at seeing me.
You and I have both done it. You get up there where we believe they are, and you try to throw the rocks down, and you try to hit where they hit. And most of the time, you're hitting trees. Most of the time, they're deflecting.
They've got to be fairly close, right? Because if they're not, then the rocks that they go are going to hit leaves, you're going to hit branches, they're going to hit trees. And these rocks are coming through, and they're bashing the wall, they're hitting the roots, they're landing at the feet of our people, leaving by their heads.
Even during Foxtrot, a rock land right next to the fire ring that may have been aimed at us. It was very close when it landed. Monica looked right over and pointed at it and said, there's the rock that just landed here. It's 10, 15 feet away from us. One of the interesting things that happened to me, to all of us really on Foxtrot, was the tree thing. Now, that happened again. Can you speak to what happened the team after Foxtrot? They had another tree incident that was very similar to ours.
Yeah, we talked about that. Brian, you and I had a conversation about that because I wanted to just pick your brain about it.
Let me take a step back. What the listeners have heard so far was an interview and a conversation we had about it, but what they have not heard is that I did go up to find that tree. I did find the tree. It was due north of where I had been standing, just as it had sounded, but it was much higher up the slope. And what I found was a tree that probably had been, at one point, 50 feet tall in that neighborhood. Yeah. And the trunk in this thing was probably 15 inches across. It was a big tree. About halfway up, the tree had been broken off, and the top half of this tree had died for whatever reason. The bottom half was still alive. There were still some green branches on it, but the top of it was dry and dead. It fell away from the slope. And so it left me puzzled because it was surrounded by ape activity. We had seen eyes. One of our team members had seen eyes a head higher than the top of my truck. And then afterward, we'd had the rock land very close to us. We saw red eye shine up on the slope. So it was surrounded by what we perceived to be ape activity. In my mind, it was an incredible coincidence that this dead tree fell in the middle of all of this. How did it push a tree over halfway up, 25 feet up in the air, the top of it fall down? So I was left perplexed about that.
What you just said is interesting, particularly in light of what we discussed 5 or 10 minutes ago about our cognizance now that they take to the trees, that we've actually seen them in the trees. So you imagine for a second a 500-pound animal that climbed a 15-inch thick tree, and it gets to a certain point up in the tree. At some point, the tree just gives way. It breaks because of its weight. That's a possibility.
Sure it is.
Another possibility is that it went up the tree and broke the tree on purpose as part of an intimidation display. Mm-hmm. What I did is I went back and I did an analysis of the after-action reports for Operation Endurance, Operation Persistence, and Operation Relentless, up to your team, Foxtrot team. What I found is that we actually documented 15 tree crashes all around the cabin over the last, since 2011,
right.
We've been going in there during the time that we've been in there.
The long-term program.
And these events are all surrounded by other activity, rock throwing, vocalizations, a lot of different things that we attribute to wood ape behavior. Yeah, trees do fall in the woods, absolutely. We see that all the time. But also, we know that apes manipulate vegetation for a given purpose. And apes like to exhibit intimidation displays. And I think there's a good possibility of what you experienced was a form of that. Because it did scare you, right? It scared the heck out of you.
Yeah, it scared all of us.
It definitely intimidated you.
Yeah.
And I had a similar experience in 2006. I was in the Davy Crockett National Forest with my wife. It was about 1 a.m, call blasting, very loud vocalizations. Within 10 seconds, we heard the cracking of a tree, we heard the tree splitting, and then we heard the tree crash to the ground. And it sounded like it was right on top of us. We never found that tree. But after that, we heard banging on metal. We don't know how they found metal in the Davy Crockett National Forest, but there was banging on metal. There were vocalizations, wood knocks. At the time, I was not sure about wood knocks. But in hindsight now, in retrospect now, I'm positive that's what it was. You all had been playing you'd been doing some call blasting.
Well, yeah, we'd been call blasting the Sierra Sounds and one of the snippets that are on that CD, and I'd been making some weird vocalizations myself, trying to imitate and call in some barred owls, because it's fun when the barred owls come in and start making their hooting and hollering. Who knows how they were interpreting that, if that's what they were doing. Golf team, the one right after us, was golf, right? They had a similar thing where a tree broke, and it was half the tree again. It wasn't the whole tree, and in this case, their tree was healthy.
They actually saw it. They saw the top of the tree fall. They could see the top, over the trees in front of them. They could see the top of this tree fall. They could see it break and then fall, and they went to inspect it and found that it was not rotted. There were no signs that they could discern of black bear, claw marks,
right.
Nothing up in the tree like honey or anything like the black bear would have before. And again, this was right there near the cabin, but this was definitely with a green tree. There was nothing wrong with this tree. It was a red oak. I think yours was a hickory tree. So, yeah, yours was a hickory. This other was a red oak. And I think yours had some signs of degradation to the tree.
It did. It looked like termites had been in there. I mean, it was old and dead on top. Yeah. So, this is what you played in your head, this back and forth ping pong of is it or isn't it? And at the time it happened, I thought it was. And then I found maybe it's not. But then you think about it, and this happens a week later, and it's the same MO, right? It's a tree getting broken off towards the top. But in this case, the tree's totally healthy. So
that's how the species remains undocumented, because everything they do, even the way they look, can be attributed to something else.
Yeah.
Their footprints, right? Some guy's walking in the woods, and he sees these barefoot footprints out in the woods, middle of nowhere. They look strangely. What kind of freak would be out here walking around barefoot? I don't know.
Some nut.
You've got a hunter in a hunting stand. He sees this upright figure walk across the cutaway 100 yards away. He thinks it's a hunter. What the heck is the hunter doing wearing a big, long black coat in early November or whatever? So he thinks it's a human. They throw logs. They make these weird sounds, but all of it can be attributed to something else. These guys are getting away with murder right here under the very noses of us and science, and they're just masters at using the environment to their advantage. It's just incredible how cognizant they are of the environment and how to use it to their advantage. They're masters of camouflage, at using their environment to camouflage their movement, to camouflage where they are.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
To your earlier point about how people may experience something and then they discount it or they explain it off as something else. I talked to Bob Strain, and this is after Paul's sighting. This was a week later. Our speculation was that if Paul had been out in the woods by himself hunting, had not been looking for Bigfoot, he may have had that experience and done what you just said. What's that guy doing out here? Like, why is he wearing a brown coat or whatever it was? He would have written it off in his head, and he would have sort of kept going. He would have just kept doing his thing. And the other funny thing is Alton has told the story of being out in an area close to X, not right in X, but not too very far away, with some people for entirely different reason, for a ancillary biological kind of survey of animals. And they heard a very loud tree knock, a very clear, super loud wood-on-wood sound. And some people in the group just completely ignored it as if it didn't happen. And another guy said, he looks up and says, "Fireworks?" And then keeps going to what it just goes to the point that people, my analogy is that there's little slots in your brain that are certain shapes, and you get these pegs, and your brain just keeps putting them through these holes, and sometimes it gets a peg that doesn't fit, so it just shoves it through a hole and keeps going, and that's what happened there, I think.
I don't know how they're able to. I don't have an explanation for how they can avoid field cameras. I just know what I've experienced, and we had dozens of cameras. We had cameras here, where we are now in Area X, out for 5 years. We didn't get a single picture. How they avoided those cameras, I have no explanation for it.
Right.
I have no idea. I just know that there is something going on with film and cameras, either because the cameras are associated with humans, which doesn't really make sense because they approach other things that are associated with humans. Their rods and cones and their eyes develop to such an extent that they can actually detect the infrared from these cameras. I don't know. I just know that we don't have a picture, nor does anybody else with a game camera. And in fact, we don't even use them anymore.
Yeah.
We don't even use them. And when I hear somebody say, I'm going to take the brute and I'm going to go put it up on the ledge and I'm going to put a Reconics camera, I just laugh.
Oh, wait, we did 150 times.
Go ahead, dude. It doesn't hurt. Yeah, you're just taking minutes and you're spending calories.
It's frustrating.
They don't work. I don't know why, but they just don't work. And these things they're masters. And there are apes. There are a very unique type of ape, but they are apes. There's nothing that we've seen that indicates they don't use spears. They don't wear clothes. They make sounds. I've heard that myself.
Right.
With my own ears, through the window. Right before one threw a lock and bashed the cabin for the 100th time, I hear football. Then I hear, bam, the rock slams the cabin. And that's ape. It's just pure ape, man. What they're doing, they throw rockets, stole the playbook from chimps.
Right. And to my experience, people who want to ascribe something beyond the animal intelligence to them haven't really done the research to know what even apes are capable of doing, because gorillas, orangutans, and chimps are capable of doing some really incredible things, but none of the things that we've experienced are outside the scope of capability for an orangutan, a chimp, or a gorilla.
Yeah, if no one had discovered orangutans yet, it's just For the psychologist, stay with me here for a second. Nobody's discovered orangutan. It is an undiscovered species that people are reporting that they're seeing. And get this, they're reporting that these orangutans are stealing their boats. They're reporting that they're stealing their boats, and not only stealing their boats, but they're stealing their fish from the cages, and they're eating the fish. And then they get in the boat, they go across the river, and they get out on the other side. Now, people would be saying, you're nuts. That's crazy.
Right.
If it is doing that, it's not an ape.
It's a forest
It's too
person.
smart. It's got to be a person. It's got to be
Right.
a human doing that, because that's too smart. I've got news for you, people. Orangutans have been documented.
Yeah, that.
They have been documented. And orangutans have been known to pick locks, to store.
That's my favorite story,
in
an
their
orangutan
mouth.
story. Be deceptive about it. They hide it in their mouth. They're not just like storing it in there. They're trying to keep their zookeepers from knowing that it's there.
Yeah, and chimps are known to collect rocks
Their use.
and then hide a stash of rocks, a big pile of them, to use as projectiles against the humans who are laughing at the chimps while they're in the zoo. So then the chimps throw rocks, and they throw their poop, and they throw rocks, and they got this big stash, and they'll continue to throw rocks. We're seeing all of that
Right.
behavior.
That strikes me, the more I'm there and the more that I read the field journals of our people who are in there, the more I learn about large primate behavior, the more parallels I see. And this also goes back, I don't know why I'm talking about Rick Knoll all night long, but Rick Knoll said the same thing. He said at one point to me, if you want to know about Bigfoot, learn about gorillas.
Absolutely. There are some people who don't want to hear that stuff. Again, I'm going to go here to golf after action. I'm just going to read you a couple of things here where they heard some vocalizations. See here, if I can find this. Oh, here's the part about when they found the tree that we were talking about. Just read this real quickly. Lawrence and Hayes hiked to find a healthy tree that the team had observed breaking at midday on Tuesday, 11 June. Lawrence and Hayes found the tree on the second mountain ledge, identified it as a red oak. The tree was indeed healthy and green. There appeared to be no readily apparent reason for the break. The team wondered if a large animal had climbed the tree and the tree gave under the animal's weight. While at the tree, the men heard a vocalization from the northeast. They described the sound as similar to how a human might sound, just as he or she were sneezing. This species would have evolved differently, would have evolved with its own sort of unique characteristics.
Right.
Oh, barking. Before I saw the two charcoal animals, and before the rock bashed that cabin, we all heard it sounded like a barking sound. And here Travis talks about in this after action report how he had a rock thrown at him from up in a tree. It came from up in a tree, and then we pursued that with a strange, deep, loud barking sound from the east. So he thought it was trying to divert him away from the first tree. So where's that vocalization? Here we go. Now, these guys have been another rock thrown into camp. Methodically, Hayes and Lawrence unloaded. They threw about 20 rocks, one right after the other, into the middle woods and onto the mountain. This is another rock war. The golf team had several rock wars with these things during their week. Now, at 22:35, this was on a Friday night, Strain, Hayes, and Lawrence heard a very bizarre vocalization from what we call the middle woods. They described it as a deep, growling, almost panthoot type of vocalization. But according to Lawrence, who heard it the best of the three, sounded almost like a deep, maniacal panthoot. That's the way he described it. He said it was really loud and echoed through the woods. Lawrence continued to throw rocks as a diversion. Hayes immediately and quickly ran around the middle woods to observe the middle woods from the south, but he wasn't able to see the animal. Really strange stuff, man. But again, very ape-like.
You remarked when you and I were there a couple of years ago and we heard the panthoot, which sounded just like, if you do a Google search for panthoot, you're going to hear what you and I heard.
Has that ever been discussed on the Bigfoot show?
I believe it has. I believe I brought it up. But you and I and another member were in very near where the cabins are that we operate out of, and we heard a panthoot, and we remarked at the time.
Right? Deeper. It was bigger and deeper.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah. And it was very loud. And what was interesting in what we heard is at the end, a bunch of coyotes that were yipping and yapping at the end, and then there were coyotes whining. So almost like something bad happened to a coyote.
And you know what's cool about that is that I didn't realize until later on. I think you sent this to me, somebody did, about Les Stroud. We heard something that sounds very similar to what you and I heard. Now, I caught the tail end of it. We had been clearing a path through the woods because there were these 3 huge logs across the trail. And so we had to cut these smaller trees so we could drive and get back to the cabin. I started up my truck engine, and I'm pulling my truck through this little narrow gap that we'd cut. We'd been sawing these trees for 30 minutes, and I looked at you in the rearview mirror, and you're doing your hand across your neck like you were emphatic, desperate. Stop, kill it. And I killed my engine. I got out, and I heard this most god-awful sound. It just kept on and on. I heard it for 10 seconds. And I think y'all heard it for 15, 20 seconds maybe.
And it was, at first I was trying to figure out if it was some kind of weird bird vocalization. And in my head, I was like, is that a turkey? I didn't know what it was. But this is what you do, right? You experience these things, and this is your brain taking a new peg and trying to find a hole that it fits into.
And then it was just clear. And the chill bumps went down my spine.
It was a freaky sound. And at the end of it, the coyotes were getting involved towards the end, yipping and yapping. And then when it stopped, the coyotes were crying. They were whining. And that. So what my speculation is, because this is all speculation, that we had just heard this interaction between these forest animals, this coyote and perhaps an ape. But we remarked at the time that it sounded almost like laughing, because that's what it sounds like. If you hear what a panhoot sounds like, it sounds like a laugh. It's crazy stuff. It's a remarkable place.
And that vocalization was like a chimp on steroids.
Really?
You imagine an 8-foot tall chimp. That's what it sounded like.
What happens next down there?
We'll still continue. Operation Relentless. I'll be going in a little over a week, taking another team in there. Alton Higgins and I, Travis Lawrence. We'll be taking another next week to continue to observe. And then we're going to continue to attempt to collect irrefutable evidence.
Right.
Species in North America. We're on it like a dog with a bone, not going away. And I want people to understand this. I did a presentation about 3 weeks ago, and one of the last questions they asked me wouldn't let us go. Once I got through with the presentation, they wanted to ask questions for another 45 minutes. One of the questions was, how long do you think it will be before this thing is proven definitively? I said, I don't know how long it will be, but I will tell you this thing could happen at any time, any day. Listeners from the Bigfoot Show, I want you to understand that. It could happen at any time. That's not a promise, but it is a promise that it could happen at any time. What I'm saying is, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I can tell you that it very well could happen at any time.
Not everyone, but people who know me personally have been asking me for percentages, like odds. And I don't know that I can give you odds, but I agree with you. It could be happening right now.
Here are your odds. When those rocks are thrown, this is what I said to you the other day, there is an ape at the other end of that rock. Right. They can't eat anymore for reasons I've already talked about. They can't eat any more than 30 yards away from it when they throw those rocks. They can't eat. So there's your odds. Now, they got darkness on their side. They've got dense woods on their side. They've got this tremendous physical ability. They've got some very sharp cognitive skills. It got some decided advantages. But we have some tricks up sleeve as well that before haven't paid off for us. But they tilted back in our favor a little bit. The odds are good that we're going to be able to solve it. Some people don't want to hear that.
No.
Some people do not want to hear that, and I'm sorry for that. But I believe in progress of science. I don't believe in dogma. I don't believe in emotivism. I don't believe in that. I believe in progress of science, and this thing exists. Science needs to know about it. The world needs to know about it. There could be great benefits for humankind by discovering this animal. Great things we could learn about ourselves, about our history, about our past, about our future, about our medicine. So it just needs to happen. And I've heard people say, why are you in a hurry? You're talking about the advancement of science, of the age. That's what needs to happen yesterday.
And then all the things that I've talked about on the show before about how we don't know what their populations are like. All the other sort of analogs of large apex predators, omnivorous animals, none of them are doing well, right? There's not one that you can point to that isn't being protected and purposely trying to be brought back. All of the ones that are out there have suffered dramatically in the past several hundred years. So there's no reason to believe that wood apes aren't in the same bucket and will continue along the same trajectory until such time as they're real and they get official recognition.
The primitive big thicket is estimated to have been, at one time, 1 million acres in size. The Big Thicket National Preserve now is probably 100,000 acres. It's highly fragmented.
It's all broken up, right? It isn't one big clump.
It's surrounded, encroached. It's surrounded by development, by highways, by residential development, cities that are growing to the south, 70 miles to the southeast. You've got Houston. There are millions and millions of people in Houston. Their habitat is dwindling, and we've got to be able to do something to be able to save that habitat. Where we are now, Area X, Our goal is to turn that into a national wildlife refuge. The last thing any of us in our organization will want to see is that entire area up there fragmented because of human development. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for human progress, and I understand that we have to be able to develop. We have to be able to expand. But at the same time, I'm also for the preservation of our precious resources in our environment, particularly where you've got an animal like this that seems to prefer large, wild expanses of wilderness. If you go and you start fragmenting that, you start logging all of it, and you start developing it, then maybe a family group needs 500 square miles, and that's got to be protected somehow. That's why the sense of urgency. This is definitely a serious issue, right. And it's critical. I think it's very critical. If we can do something to save that and to keep these places like the Big Thicket, for instance, from being further fragmented, which would then, we think, help this species, then we need to do it, and we need to do it quickly.
Agreed. Daryl, I really appreciate you coming on. I know that we've just scratched the surface of the things that have happened in there, and we could keep going for 2 more hours telling stories.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But I do appreciate you coming on the show and taking your time and filling in the background of this year's Operation Relentless. And that's it.
They say